The Cold Omaha Podcast Network.
Hell yeah, let's get Stinko.
Live from our regular haunt, it's the new episode of the Giles and the Goalies podcast. I am Giles Farrell. Across the table for me is Ben Remington.
Hello.
Before we dive into our topics for the week, just want to thank all the listeners again for the incredible ratings we've gotten in the last month or so, really since the end of the regular season.
Yeah.
It's been pretty great, and just a reminder for everyone, if you like our product, which I don't know why you do, drop us one of those iTunes ratings. We love those. Everyone's been pretty nice so far.
Yeah.
Guessing as the more we go, we're going to find some stragglers.
You can't make everybody happy, and I'm the type where, I feel like on the most part, I'm a guy who doesn't try to stir things up a whole lot. I'm not. But at the same time, I take a little bit of pride in the fact that a few people hate me.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's the construct of a worthwhile life. You know, where I think it's like a Churchill quote or something where if somebody hates you good, it means you've stood up for something at some point in your life. So yeah, it's good that people like us, and also maybe kind of good that a couple of people hate us.
Yeah. I mean, we're full on embracing the fact that we know some people out there don't like us, and it is now on our podcast Twitter bio, where I don't know if you noticed, but I did change it to Giles and the Goalie Podcast, a Minnesota Wild podcast hosted by Chuck Fletcher apologist, Giles Farrell and Ben Remington.
If you could include the salad of podcasts somewhere in there, that would top it off, I believe. We are the salad of podcasts.
It used to be the Mooters jersey.
Yes, the Mooters jersey of podcasts.
I had a tough time moving on from that because that was a very good description of us. But
yeah,
all right, enough about us. We got a lot to hit on this week.
We don't want to run as long as last week.
Right. Trust me, we're trying to cut down on the minutes as much as you want us to, because I have to go back and edit this. So that was a large chunk of the day. So anyway, before we get into our breakdown of the Minnesota Wild defense, we have to talk about the biggest news story from the last week. I'm sure you read about it because, I mean, it had to have taken the NHL news scene by storm. I was kind of cut off from NHL news at this point in the week for a few obvious reasons, but we have to address it because it appears that the Anaheim Ducks listen to this podcast. After my inspired rant last week, a certain ex-forward of the Anaheim Ducks appeared in a Twitter video, marking off their 8th win of the postseason in their kind of weird way where they paint the walls of Honda Center.
Right.
And that was Paul Kariya.
Yeah.
Ducks steal it here. Shot, score! Paul Kariya! Number 50! First time in franchise history, the mighty Ducks of Anaheim have a 50-goal score.
How this was not ESPN front page news, I'm not sure, but
I don't know about that. I mean, maybe they wanted it to be front page news and I just missed it, but their NHL Twitter account just tweeted out another link to a soccer story.
Oh, well, I mean, maybe they're just consolidating there, you know? Yeah. Soccer and hockey, let's face it, as far as ESPN is concerned especially, they're very niche sports because they don't involve LeBron James or Tom Brady. So, it's probably, I mean, eventually they're going to fold baseball into that mix too. And it's just going to be football, basketball, and then they're just going to have a section called Amalgamation of Sport. And that's going to be the rest of what they cover.
Because we have to talk about this, obviously.
Of course.
This came out on Thursday, and we quote tweeted it from the podcast account. If you by chance missed it, not too hard to find, because I used just about any social media account I had at my discretion to make sure that it was well known.
Yep.
First of all, I'm going to lay out how Thursday was. I was not having a good day by any means on Thursday. Okay. In more ways than one. Lots of which was from the night previous.
Ah, gotcha.
I didn't catch this until about, I think it was like 3:30 in the afternoon that this video came out, and I caught the Anaheim Ducks beat reporter talking about Paul Kariya, and I like, what's going on? Why are we talking about Paul Kariya? Nobody. I'm the only one that gives a crap about it.
Were your spider sense tingling?
So I dug and I saw this video that was retweeted, and it was about the most epic way you could have put Paul Kariya into that video, because they also had a kid who was part of the Make-A-Wish Foundation in this video with him, and they were crossing off the number 9 because they're counting down the wins to the Stanley Cup at Honda Center. So the kid put one half of the X, and then Paul Kariya walked up the steps, and he crossed off the other half. And by God, one, I was grinning like David Ortiz for the rest of the afternoon. And my work productivity went from very limited to nothing. Yeah. Because that is the only thing I did for the rest of the day. And I hope nobody from work listens to this.
Yeah, so that's a big day for you. That's interesting, and what will be interesting, obviously, going forward is how he's, if there's anything besides this, like, literally, this was so shocking and jaw-dropping to people in the know, because he had
cut himself
completely
off.
Written himself off from that franchise and from the sport altogether, almost, and then, like you said, he popped up dropping the puck in Penticton, and now he's in an actual promo video, like, are we seeing Paul Kariya's number retired next year? I guess, is that what's going to happen?
By God, do I hope so. I do want to point out that the night before I tweeted you in a joking fashion that the only way that's going to make me feel better about the Capitals' loss, which we're going to get to later, is the fact that, the only thing that'll make me feel better about the Capitals' loss is if Paul Kariya comes out and slams Gary Bettman in the back of the head with a chair.
Yeah. WWE style.
That was as pretty close to it as you could get.
Yeah. I gotta think you're pretty happy.
That was a good day.
Yeah.
That really picked up the day, and I'm going to roughly estimate I've watched that video about 45,000 times.
Tremendous.
So that's exciting. I know listeners turn on this podcast for in-depth Paul Kariya coverage. Maybe there's a Ducks podcast I can go on and talk about Paul Kariya.
You just talk about how happy you are that he was in a promotional video?
Yeah. And I still picked against the Ducks.
Well, yeah, I mean...
We'll get to that later.
Sure.
So last week on the show, we dissected the Wild forwards and their season, and we spent way too much time on that.
Yeah, when you say dissected, you mean dissected.
Yeah, we really cut it open.
Spent a lot of time.
Well, and then it didn't help that we had the tangent to Paul Kariya in the middle of that.
True.
So that really added time.
Yeah.
But today we're going to talk about the Wild defense, and it's going to be a little shorter because there's not nearly as many.
Right.
And just for time's sake, we're going to, again, try to limit how much we say, but we're going to get carried away again.
Sure, of course.
That's why we're quickly jumping into it here. Basically what we do is take each player, run off some stats, and share a few words. But like I said, this one shouldn't take us long. So the first one on the list, as always, Brian Suter.
Yeah.
40 points this season, 9 goals, 31 assists. His ice time, as we said before the season, his ice time needed to go down, and it did. He was averaging 26 minutes and 55 seconds during the regular season, and that went over 29 minutes in the playoffs as Bruce Boudreau really shortened his bench, and he seemingly did not have a trust of a few defensemen in the lineup in the playoffs, and also when the Wild were playing from behind for most of the series. You got to throw Suter out there for a lot of that. So big reason why his minutes were up.
I haven't even looked. Were Brodeen's numbers way down in the postseason? Was his ice time way down? Because I got to assume he got hurt the most by that third line basically being, damn near eliminated. Because I know Prosser didn't get a whole lot of minutes, and I assume Brodeen didn't
Prosser,
get much
Folin
more.
Didn't,
because Brodeen was the partner to those two cats.
No, Brodeen averaged 19 minutes.
How?
Yeah,
I guess they spread it around, and he probably ended up with Suter and Brodeen out there together a little bit. I guess I didn't notice that because we all know how crazy that drives Ryan Suter playing with Jonas Brodeen. But
I think what we saw was just that somebody rotated in on that third pair with Brodeen because nobody was playing with. Or Prosser and Folin were benched, essentially.
Basically, yeah. They played about, 5 minutes a game?
Folin he averaged 11.24 somehow.
Wow. I'm surprised at that.
In 2 games, and Prosser 9.47 in 3 games.
Yeah,
as meant that was a big reason why Suter's minutes had a sharp increase.
Yeah, so with Suter, obviously he's back next year, and the no movement clause means he's not exposed to Vegas, and there's really not going to be much to be said about Ryan Suter at this point. I think, for better or for worse, he draws a lot of ire from Wild fans, and I'm not really sure. I kind of get why, but at the same time, just like everything else that drives Wild fans nuts, it's kind of silly. He is what he is. He's Ryan Suter. He's never going to win a Norris Trophy. He's never going to score more than 50 points in a season. So, yeah, they're paying him a lot of money, but what are you expecting out of him that you're not getting? And the folks that say he did look rough in the playoffs, sure, but
before I looked it up, I just kind of had this feeling where I was like, Suter had a really strong first half of the year, and then it just seemed to kind of fall off in the second half, and then I looked, and the stats kind of backed up my theory was. He had 30 points in 48 games before the All-Star break.
Wow.
And if I'm not mistaken, he was an All-Star.
Yeah.
And then after the All-Star break, 34 points, or 34 games.
10 points.
10 points.
Yeah, that kind of sums up the month of March for the Wild, though,
Yeah, and only 4 points in that dreaded month of March. I don't know. Everyone seemingly wonders every year if Suter was hurt because we just feel like at some point his game kind of drops off. And I don't know. I thought a big reason why he was doing well early in the season was he was taking slap shots.
Yeah.
He wasn't taking his sweet time with the puck at the blue line and then deciding to fire a wrist shot that gets blocked. He was a little more decisive on shooting, and he was taking slap shots, which he has a good slap shot. It's not bad.
Right.
And really in the last half of the year you didn't see it, and when he's getting the power play time like he is, you'd like him to use that more, but I don't know. I just don't think that's his comfort zone. I don't think he likes taking that shot. And that's why you see so much tentative play from him. When the puck goes into him, and people have talked about him being a black hole with the puck, he does. He absolutely looks to distribute it first. He's looking, to feed the other guys on the half wall, or he'll throw that half-hearted wrister that everyone hates so much, and rightfully so. I'm not excusing him for that whatsoever. But, I think that's a very, very fair criticism of Ryan Suter, is that he's not a dynamic power play player. He's, like you said, he was really good to start off the season, and we heard about how he, Boudreau wanted defensemen to take more shots. And if there's anything that we can learn from, watching these playoffs as a, objective observer, defensemen are a huge part of your offense if you let them be. And it just seems like with the Wild, a lot of the players, most notably Suter and Brodeen, just don't want to be. They're just very, very content with not getting involved in the offense. Spurgeon and Scandella seem to be kind of on the fence with that. Dumba seems like the only guy who wants to step up and make some offensive plays as much as he can. So with Suter, I think if you don't, I think one of two things have to happen with Suter. Either you take him off the power play next year because he spent so much damn time on the power play this year. Either you take him off,
Or you keep him on with the understanding that, Ryan, you got to take more shots. You got to take a lot bigger shots because, you don't have the heaviest slap shot on the team, but you've got a good enough shot and you're good enough with distributing the puck that you're valuable on the power play if you just use that shot. And slap shots from the point and getting screens, deflections, and rebounds, I mean, that's basically how the Blues beat the Wild.
Right.
With those kind of goals. And 100%. And the Wild just don't get those kind of goals. It just seems like they never score deflected goals, point shots, rebounds off of point shots. It just seems like that's the white rhino for the Wild as far as goal scoring goes.
Lacking those greasy goals is definitely something they need to figure out. And you just don't find players that can be that type of net front presence effectively often. But
I think they've got some of those players, though. I think Coyle can be that guy. Alex Tuck made a living on that at Boston College. I think they have those players. Zach Parise, not the biggest guy, but certainly plays like it. I think they have those kind of guys.
Shows signs of that, but it's getting them to do that more consistently is the problem. Next defenseman on the list, Jared Spurgeon, seemingly everyone's favorite defenseman. He had 38 points in 76 games this year. That is a career high for Jared Spurgeon. And we'll get to the records here in a minute, and you mentioned him last week as their most consistent player of the season, and that's a very fair thing to say.
Yeah.
And again, it seems like for probably at least the third year in a row, I'd argue that he was probably the Wild's best defenseman this year. Mm-hmm. And that's the highest compliment you can give him.
Yeah, and it's been very fascinating, as bloggers as we are. 2 years ago, around this time, I wrote the article about what are we going to get for Jared Spurgeon? Because the writing's on the wall that Spurgeon is the odd man out. They just devoted a lot of money towards Brodin. They just devoted a lot of money towards Scandella. Obviously, the Suter contract was there. It seemed like Spurgeon was the guy that was going to get forced out. And I don't know if it's the involvement of the War on Ice folks necessarily, or if it's just a good old-fashioned eye test realization from the front office that, hey, Jared Spurgeon's really good. He's really good. And he's not the biggest guy on the ice, obviously, but he's really good.
Well, the Wild front office, they found him from the waiver wire from the New York Islanders. And I'm sure the front office and the analytics folks don't always see eye to eye on players, but I am guessing this is one of the few that they commonly agree on is that, yes, he is a very good player.
So does he qualify under the thank you Garth as well?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he should, Him and Nino.
Chuck Fletcher gives Garth Snow thank you baskets every summer.
Does he get him some edible arrangements, perhaps?
Yep.
Yeah.
Edible arrangements for Garth Snow.
Meanwhile, Tim Murray sends edible arrangements to Chuck Fletcher for all the second-round picks. Except now he doesn't have a job. So.
Well, now he's sending him edible arrangements in the hopes that he can get a job. I was thinking about that the other day. Like, who is Chuck Fletcher going to, trade with this offseason? Because his pal Tim Murray's not in charge of Buffalo anymore. And,
right.
Maybe there's a trade to be had with the Islanders again to fleece them. Cause
be great.
Garth Snow always ripe for the picking.
Right. I mean, the whole Tavares future is uncertain. If the Islanders are smart, they tank. Just saying.
Get John Tavares here.
Yeah.
Let's have reasonable expectations.
Yep.
Anyway, that's probably all we can say about Jared Spurgeon is, best defenseman and, analytics love him. And
for good reason. So, luckily he's wrapped up for a couple of years now. And he's I would say a 100% lock to be protected in the expansion draft. You can only protect 3 defensemen, and this is going to get important with the next 3 guys we talk about. Right. You can only protect 3. Suter has to be one of them. Right. Spurgeon is absolutely, positively the other one. Right. And then the third one, we'll find out.
Which we'll debate on a later show as we inch closer to the expansion draft.
Right.
Matt Dumba next on the list, third amongst Wild defensemen in points this year with 34. Now, he was kind of the unofficial whipping boy.
Oh, God, yes.
Among Wild defensemen this year. But I would like to point out that his 34 points were tied for 10th most in Wild history. And Spurgeon and Suter being hired, impacted the record books too.
Right.
But his points production isn't far off from what Brent Burns was doing at that age. It's just a little slightly less, but very comparable. Now, I'm not saying that Matt Dumba is going to be the next Brent Burns, but
Don't you hate Pan?
when you're getting that kind of point production out of him at that age, and you have a lot of good hockey left. Matt Dumba's only 22.
Yeah.
It seems foolish to expose him at this point, despite his defensive mishaps at some points.
Yeah, and people just love destroying him on turnovers and how he'll make mistakes with the puck on occasion, and we'll be the first ones to tell you, having watched as much games as we have, there's some times where Dumba makes some pretty ugly mistakes. There's also some times where Jonas Brodin makes some ugly mistakes. There's also times where Marco Scandella makes some ugly mistakes. We've seen Ryan Suter make ugly mistakes. We've seen even Jaron Spurgeon on occasion makes an ugly mistake. So I think it's just it's just one of those things where they're trying to back up this opinion that they have of Matt Dumba as being this shoddy defenseman, this forward in a defenseman's body kind of player, when really, maybe there is some truth to that, given that he is a kind of a pure, he's the prototypical two-way defenseman. But I don't think he's that bad defensively. I don't think that he's a complete liability out there like some people would lead you to believe. And yeah, I think I would prefer to see him protected or anything. Also, something that we haven't brought up, and again, we'll get into this in very much detail later, but he doesn't have the cap hit that Scandella or Brodin has. So if you lose him, you lose that much more money to pay Granlund and Niederreiter versus if you lose Scandella or Brodin, that frees up a little bit more cash. So lots of reasons to keep Matt Dumba. His offensive potential obviously being a number one. So I would agree on that. And you got to look forward to this kid getting better. Like you said, he's 22. He just turned 22. He's got a booming shot. He's obviously he's made some just ridiculous plays, some dynamic offensive plays, pinching down into the zone. And you got to think he's only going to get better.
Matt Dumba's cap hit $2.55 million next season, and then he's an RFA
right
in the summer. And compared to Jonas Brodin and his $4.16 and Marco Scandella's $4 million cap hit.
Right.
And like you said, you have to think that you want to get one of those off the books instead of Dumba, just to give you a little more cap flexibility. And again, I don't know why people seem to think this, but there's a very small, next to none chance that Jason Pominville is going to somehow come off the books magically next year.
He's not.
Let's get that out of our heads.
Yeah, let's just give up on that and move on to more productive thoughts.
Jonas Brodin, 25 points in 68 games this year. Just 3 goals. Not expecting him to score a lot of goals, but he was one of seemingly 3, if not more, defensemen that were very uneven at times this year, and in the Wild are paying him that kind of money. You'd like to get a little more consistency, but as Michael Russo has often kind of pointed out, he is what he is at this point, and maybe he's somebody you try to get Vegas to take because maybe there's a little more offensive upside to Marco Scandella to maybe keep him on the books next year, but I just don't see any reason why you'd protect Jonas Brodin.
Yeah, I would agree. And he was a guy similar to Suter that I feel like he got off to a better offensive start. You started to see a little bit of offense out of him, and then it completely just petered out, much like Suter's season did. But it just, you're waiting and waiting and waiting for him to find that next level, and it seems like his play, I don't know, I wouldn't go as far as to say that he's regressed, but it kind of feels like he's regressed. It feels like he was this lockdown, shut down defender And maybe that was just him playing with Suter that you felt like that. But it seems like in the last 2 seasons, him being paired with Dumba a lot, people pointed to that last year. I don't know if that's actually a reason for his numbers hurting. And then this year he kind of, was on the third line a lot or paired with Dumba as well. But he just didn't have a good year. He didn't have a very productive year. And you saw a lot of defensive mistakes out of him that you wouldn't expect out of a guy who is very much a stay-at-home defender, very much supposed to be solid in his own end.
I have a theory. What if there was some offensive upside to Jonas Brodin and it got lost with the previous head coach?
When you started that, I thought you were going down the route of like Space Jam, where like aliens came in and they stole Jonas Brodin's offensive potential.
Let's get him some secret stuff.
Your secret stuff.
You might be right.
I feel like it was the 2013-14 season, and it started to feel like Brodin was going to take off offensively a little bit, and he kind of got off to a similar good start, and then I don't know if he just got called out for being too offensive or what, but he really stepped it back, and we don't really see that much from him, and the skills are there. It is kind of frustrating when you know that he can do so much better and offensively, and you just don't see it.
Yeah, it is, and so I don't know. You don't know what to do with him at this point, And if he is on this team next season, which is very possible, again, they can only protect 3 guys, and it's not like if you expose him, he's guaranteed to be gone. He's not guaranteed to be gone at all. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens, but he's going to be an interesting case because it's going to be what kind of offensive potential can they milk out of him, and or can they get him to be an even better defender in his own end, because it seemed like that forte of his slipped this year.
Marco Scandella, 71 games, 13 points. He was probably my favorite whipping boy for Wild defenseman this year, and as I've noted time and time again, he was the one defenseman I've been most disappointed with this year, in the fact that we've seen so much better from him, and it's just very, very underwhelming, his play this year, and this is now the second straight year we've seen this from him after having a couple promising seasons leading up to it to give him that new contract. And now you're at the point where this isn't just a small sample size. This is a really large amount of time that he has been underperforming, and maybe his good postseason was enough for Las Vegas to go, yeah, we'll take him off your hands for you and clear up $4 million of cap space.
Yeah, entirely possible. And he's a guy where there is offensive potential there, and it's more unlocked, I would say, at this point, even than Jonas Brodin, but also egregious defensive miscues from him, which wasn't something you saw to him before. I mean, he was pretty rock solid before, and this year it just seemed like he just crapped the bed a number of times.
It wasn't helping that you were putting Matt Dumba and Marco Scandella on the same pair for most of the season. And
they really kind of amplified it.
Yeah, they were not helping each other out. Yeah. Usually a defenseman can pick up the other if there are defensive miscues from one of them, but that was not the case at all with this. And this is a fair criticism of Boudreau, is just continuing to go with that and not splitting them up. It seemed like it was worth a shot just to take, and it really never was taken. Maybe it was briefly for a period or two, but he just kept going back to it.
Yeah, the two of those paired together was curious, and even especially in the playoffs, it was really weird to see them paired together in the playoffs. I don't know. It just feels like, something's going to change anyway. They're not going to continue with the same exact defensive core they had last season. So we know that's going to change, obviously. But I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what what defense are left after this offseason, you very well could see a guy dealt. As much as some people, for some inexplicable reason, want the Wild to trade for defense, I think that's even more possible, as we talked about last week, that maybe a guy like Mike Riley is dealt, maybe a guy like Gustav Olofsson is dealt. So it's very, very possible that this defensive core is very different going into next year, as far as from a depth standpoint. Obviously, the top 4 probably aren't going anywhere. Top 3 obviously aren't going anywhere. But yeah, who knows?
We won't get to them because we really didn't get much of a body of work, but we've kind of made our thoughts on Riley and Olofsson known, and obviously hope to see them next year get a little more playing time in Minnesota, and especially a guy like Mike Riley who could really help out a power play. But again, what happens this off season remains to be seen.
Well, and he's like the prototypical guy to replace Suter on the power play. He's that type of player where he's gung-ho to rush the puck up ice. He wants to enter the zone with the puck. He wants to put pucks on the net. He's got a good shot to do it. And he's got a willingness to do it, most importantly. So if getting Mike Riley into the top 6 next year and getting Ryan Suter off the power play just kind of makes a lot of sense if that's what indeed does happen.
Christian Folin played in 51 games this year, which I didn't think it was that much.
Wow.
And as the expression on your face just clearly backed up that. He battled injuries seemingly all season, had a really good start, but then got hurt and never really recovered. And he's now RFA this year, and he just recovered from shoulder surgery, I believe.
Yeah.
Obviously, I really liked what I saw at the beginning of the year when he was playing well. But, if they go back with him again next year, or if they maybe just trade him to somebody who could take a flyer on a defenseman like him. But it seems like with him in the mix, maybe that's just another roadblock for Riley and Olofsson to get over. And you move him and you give one of them a shot to crack the team next year.
Yeah. Well, and Nate Prosser's contract is up, so that helps that situation a little bit. I wouldn't be furious if they don't re-sign Nate Prosser, but at the same time, if they did, I'd be like, what the hell are you doing? Why are you spending that money on him when you've got guys ready to go? And Folin is one of those guys where I think he is worthy of a third pair. I mean, I don't know that you can make the argument for him definitively being a top 4 defender, but I think he's well suited for the third pair. Most surprising to me, he's got kind of a booming shot that he almost never uses, and it'd be interesting to see if that comes into play next season at all, if he gets a little more ice time, if he's healthy all year.
It'd be interesting to see what you could get from the New York Rangers for a guy like Folin.
Right.
The Rangers are a team that badly needs a defenseman with some kind of upside, and he could be had on the cheap contract-wise.
Right.
And I'm just spitballing. Just throwing that out there.
No, it's not unfair because they do have an embarrassment of riches as far as defenseman goes, and like I said, I'm not going to be irate if they re-sign Nate Prosser, but if they make a deal, they deal a guy like Folin, then you sign Nate Prosser. He's a perfect 7th defenseman. Yeah. I'm not crazy about seeing Nate Prosser in the lineup. When he's in the lineup, he does okay, but it kind of is what it is. So no, I think that does open up the door for a guy like Christian Folin to get dealt if the price is right. If somebody sees enough in him to want to deal a worthwhile asset for him, then yeah.
Nate Prosser, last defenseman on the list here. 39 games, 7 points, but he's not a points machine by any stretch of the imagination. And you know what you're going to get out of him when he's in the lineup, and he's just kind of a crash dummy back there taking hits, and he does an all right job of getting the puck up the ice. He does. The analytics do say he is on the ice for a lot of shot attempts against, which that's expected. But if, like you said, if they brought him back as a 7th defenseman, that's not the worst thing, but he's 30 years old at this point, and maybe you just want to move on and open up the door for Riley Olofsson.
Yeah, if you don't deal any other defenders, if you just lose one to Vegas and that's it, and you don't move any other defenders, I don't see re-signing. I don't know why. I mean, other than just to be a seventh defenseman, because it makes more sense to have him in the press box in St. Paul and Gustav Olofsson in Iowa than Gustav in the press box and Nate Prosser playing in, I don't know, Europe.
And he's a guy you kind of throw in the lineup for when you're going to play a more physical team.
Yeah.
Like St. Louis or Anaheim.
He takes a beating, that's for sure. Prosser.
And he's got a little more sandpaper to him than the Wild defenseman, but I'm by no means saying, we need to keep him solely on the basis of sandpaper.
No. No, but it's a worthwhile asset for him to have, and it is something different that he brings to the team. But
just probably why he's still around.
Probably. Yeah, like I said, if he's a seventh defenseman, great, sure. I mean, I'm sure he's going to come cheap, so that's nice. But I don't want to see him on the third pair for most of the season next year, taking away time from guys like Olofsson and Riley.
That's all we got for the defensemen. Next week, we just get to run down the three goalies. Yay. But
hot takes.
There wasn't really, there's no Wild news this last week, so that's really all we got for Wild-related topics. We're just going to quickly dive into the NHL playoffs here to kind of run down the show.
Yeah, and it's a big time for that because, since the last time we spoke, the conference finals have been determined. So I don't know how much you want to talk about that, but...
Well, as we begin this discussion, there's no drink in front of me.
Oh.
Should be on the way.
Oh, no. What a time to run out of beer.
So, yeah, since we last convened, all the series finished up. Nashville beat St. Louis in 6. Ottawa beat New York in 6. It just floored. Anaheim came back from behind in Game 7 at home to Edmonton, won 2-1. I was kind of stunned after that first goal.
I was too.
And then Washington forced a Game 7, only to crush my soul.
Oh, man.
And I'll say this. This is probably why they lost, but that day I truly started to believe, this is it for Washington. They're going to finally blow past Pittsburgh.
Right.
They found a whole nother gear at the end of Game 5 and a whole nother gear in Game 6. Steamrolled Pittsburgh, and it just looked like they were going to go. And they came out guns blazing in Game 7. And it just felt like had they been able to score a goal in those first 10 minutes, the game would have been so much different, but they couldn't. Pittsburgh just hung around, and then they scored that first goal. I think it was in the second period. And then once they scored the second goal, Washington just was totally defeated, and Pittsburgh flipped the script, and they pushed the play in the third period, and Washington did not do a thing. So I guess credit to Pittsburgh for withstanding a storm and somehow escaping that Game 7 with a win, but that's really it for Washington.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obvious they're going to take a step back next year with, a lot of roster turnover, but Pittsburgh will be good again next year. And as we saw in the first round, the Toronto Maple Leafs are knocking on the doorstep of being a contender every year now.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what the Montreal Canadiens are going to do, but they're always a good team with Carey Price. And and again, the same can be said for the New York Rangers. They're a team that just somehow sticks around, but they have a lot of problems, as we saw against Ottawa on the back end. And there's teams who didn't make the playoffs who could seemingly next year. Thank you, Carolina Hurricanes. Now that they have a good goalie, They could be a team that charges up the standings. Tampa Bay Lightning are seemingly going to be back in the playoffs next year.
Stamkos is healthy, yeah.
But that was Washington's window, especially given how the rest of the playoffs have shaken out. Like, if they were going to win it all, this was the year, and they could not beat a really banged-up Pittsburgh team. And I don't like to say that the mental problems in there, but man, this team just finds a whole nother level of mental problems when they get down against Pittsburgh. It's very similar to watching the Minnesota Wild play the Chicago Blackhawks in the postseason. You fall behind, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's weird because that's such a good team. I mean, that's such a good team, and that franchise has been very good for very long. And you know, it really sucks. You never want to see a collective team get a reputation as a choking team, because I never really like that. I never really like labeling that as like a personality trait of a team. You can't really put it on the rest of the team. First of all, hasn't, half the team hasn't even been there for 3 or 4 years. The roster turns over enough, and you can't really put that all on Ovechkin, because as it's bared out, he's played well. He's played well in the playoffs, and maybe he hasn't come up huge in clutch situations where he needs to. Sure, that's probably a fair criticism of him, but it's still, he's still produced enough in the playoffs to where that shouldn't be the knock on him.
And it came out after Washington's season ended that Ovechkin was practically playing on one leg.
Yeah. Which if you saw the Kadri hit on him early in that series, it was definitely it, because that was a nasty knee-on-knee, and luckily he won't need surgery because of it. But he's not playing in the Worlds, which is telling, because Alexander Ovechkin freaking loves playing for Russia.
And I don't know if you saw, but there was a photo of his leg.
No, I didn't.
It did not look good. His wife posted that on the Instagram story feature, and I saw it on Reddit.
Yeah.
And that was not pretty. Not at all.
I'm sure there's a lot of...
We can kind of save this for a different time, but I kind of did some soul searching after this. Because,
fair.
I don't necessarily believe trading Alex Ovechkin is the right thing, but I'm not 100% against it. But
I don't. I would say I would be, because at that point, what are you doing?
And if you're trading Alex Ovechkin, then you're full on just saying, okay, we're stripping down and rebuilding.
Exactly. So, and if that's the case, because it's so hard to win in sports, and even if you're a generational talent, you might only win one championship. And maybe that's all you ever have to your credit. And look at Brett Favre. One title.
Yeah.
And Peyton Manning, 2. It's not... These generational talents don't necessarily rack up championships just because they're the best player in the game. We talked about Dan Marino, never had one. So it's just like... If you're going to trade Ovechkin, you're going to spin that team into the doldrums of the NHL, and you're rebuilding. I mean, there's no other way to put it. You're not trading him in a situation where, maybe some crazy way you make some kind of blockbuster deal and get a different superstar for him. I'm sure most teams would be willing to do it, but then you're just reshuffling the deck. You're shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic, whatever you want to call it. It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
And then why are you doing it? Do you think that trading him for Tyler Seguin, does that make your team better? Well, I don't know. Not really. And does it make your team more apt to win in the playoffs? There's no freaking way you can prove that. Not at all. So it's just silly, and it's just the typical knee-jerk sports fan reaction that something has to change, and they need these moves to feel justice because they've been so wronged by their favorite team losing the playoffs, because obviously the players don't care. And it's so silly because there's no logic involved whatsoever.
I could have picked any other team to kind of be my backup option for when the Wild lose in the playoffs. But I find it funny now upon reflection that I found the one team to be the backup that just about mirrors the Wild.
Yeah, well.
And the Capitals are just a little more successful in the regular season, but the playoffs just about match up the same, folks.
Basically. They still can't get out of the second round either. And then it is what it is. I mean, the playoff structure doesn't help.
No.
They should have been playing Pittsburgh in the conference final, but I don't know, maybe Ottawa is this super team we never knew existed, but that would have been a phenomenal Eastern Conference final, but, is what it is, so it's still on them. They still would have had to beat Pittsburgh at some point, so.
Wow. Ottawa's just more winning because this is Guy Boucher channeling 2003 Jacques Lemaire and playing a very defensive style of hockey that's gotten them to the conference final.
Yeah.
With that said, we did make some predictions on our Twitter account at GatG Wild Podcast before the third round started, just so we had them out there. We both had Pittsburgh beating Ottawa. You had them in 5. I had them in 6. I gave Ottawa a little credit. And then you have the Ducks in 7, and I have the Preds in 7.
Yeah.
It seemed like that game is destined for a 7th game, and it probably should be based on what we saw Friday night.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's certainly not the teams we envisioned in the Final Four at this point.
No, and nobody in our podcast bracket challenge did either, because all 32 entries are not going to have the Stanley Cup champ right.
And so, I mean, with that in mind, it's still obviously been a good playoff so far, and the conference finals, both games have gotten overtime now. We'll see what happens tonight, but it's been a lot of fun. It's been a good playoffs. Even considering that the big teams have been knocked out relatively early.
I haven't seen more than 5 minutes of these first 2 games here in the third round.
Yeah.
It was just the overtime of Nashville-Anaheim in Game 1. I've kind of just opted to do other things while those games were happening, instead of, basically me telling friends, yeah, I'm busy, whereas I'm just watching hockey.
There's a playoff game on.
And this is going to speak to this segment of the show now that's pretty much unique to this episode, but you look at the teams remaining, and I have problems with all of these teams.
Right.
I don't have a team that I'm really actively cheering for, and it's probably good for all of them because I'm the kiss of death when it comes to having a team in the playoffs. But it's bad. They're all there's just no sure, there's some players on each team I'd like to see win, but just a lot of negatives that outweigh the good. And you start with, what is it, Nashville. I mean, yeah, PK Subban, I love him, and who doesn't? Oh, okay, Mike Milbury,
the NHL.
But yeah, them too. But this is a team that has James Neal, a guy that seemingly every year runs over a Wild player and gets hurt, and he's a knob, and he scores a game winner in Game 1. And then this is a team that plays Cody McLeod on their 4th line.
Yeah.
It's like Nashville would be an obvious choice, except they have Cody McLeod, and I have problems. I have problems cheering for them because of him.
I can see that.
Going back to the Colorado days when, you can...
He was such a tool.
You can put him as a poop emoji. So that's my problem with Nashville. Anaheim, I am not a fan of Corey Perry.
Who is?
And as mentioned many times before on this podcast, Anaheim's disrespect of their history is appalling to me.
Right.
I kind of wrote this out before Paul Kariya surfaced, so
well,
maybe they're coming around in their history now.
And maybe, but they still are, and it's even been like, this is nationally, this isn't just, you and I being Mighty Ducks apologists.
Because we are ducks, and ducks fly together.
Nationally, this is an unlikable team. I mean, for as good as Getzlaf and Perry are,
nobody likes
they come across as just massive douchebags. And massive. And whether it's tweets about Getzlaf rolling up in his Ferrari and walking out of it with the door open, or anytime you see Corey Perry's face, there's just things about this team where you're just like, God, I just hate these guys.
And then they have probably one of the more unlikable coaches, at least just to the analytics community, and Randy Carlisle, who we laughed at when they hired him back. And somehow he's still there, and I also just want the Ducks to lose because it just kind of vindicates Bruce Boudreau, but that would have come in the 7th game of the last round.
It does, and that part of it is unfortunate.
And you flip over to the East, and Ottawa, they have Chris Neal, who, good Lord.
They did scratch him in Game 1.
It's like Game 5, or I think it was Game 5, when he played like 2 minutes, got into a fight, never played again, and then the media just giving him a hand job after because it changed the momentum of the game with that fight. Just, why? No. And their owner, Eugene Melnick, is... what an idiot.
He's like one of the stereotypical, he's the stereotypical bat-ass crazy owner that you just really can't get behind.
Well, and then he disses his best player, who's carried them to 2 wins this postseason, Erik Karlsson, in like March when the Olympic stuff kind of started to break out. And he said that, if Erik Karlsson was Canadian, I'd let him go play in the Olympics. Eugene Melnick, Canadian, won't let Erik Karlsson, Sweden, go play in the Olympics because he's not Canadian.
Let's throw in some casual xenophobia there while we're at it, right? Yeah, that's just, he's just that one of those guys where it's like, you're interested every time he opens his mouth just because something stupid always comes out. But not a guy where you're like, I'm not going to say that there's like a whole lot of owners in the NHL where you're like, oh man, I love that guy. But he's definitely one where you're like, if you could just not talk, that would be probably better for the league.
Pittsburgh, I'm tired of them. They're all just, sure, Crosby, Malkin, Kessel, they're all great, and Jake Gensel's having a great postseason, which is nice, but I'm just tired of watching them win. They've had a nice run. They should have lost, and at least I'll just take comfort in the fact knowing that Marc-Andre Fleury's probably going to give them the middle finger this offseason and say, I'm not going anywhere. I just won you another Stanley Cup, and will not waive his no-move clause, forcing them to figure out that situation with Matt Murray in the expansion draft.
That's a situation where I think they're almost guaranteed to pay Vegas not to take Murray, kind of thing. We saw that with the Wild expansion draft where the Sharks paid the Wild and the Blue Jackets not to take Evgeny Nabokov. I think that's a similar situation brewing there because it doesn't make much sense for Fleury to waive it. It doesn't make much sense for Vegas to pass on Matt Murray. That's an interesting story developing, given that Marc-Andre Fleury has all but wrapped up the Conn Smythe at this point. I mean, it's rare that you say that out of someone who 2 rounds in, but barring a complete disaster, his story in this playoffs has just been absolutely incredible.
Easy favorite for the Conn Smythe.
Right.
After 2 rounds, and weirdly, I think he was only 3rd or 4th down the list of Vegas odds to win the Conn Smythe. Anyway, so that's what I got for why I don't like each team remaining, and I'm sure this week I'll get back to watching it pretty regularly, but just this weekend I just decided to just go do some other things, and
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And what you brought this idea up to me, and I thought it was great, even though I'm not, quite as loathsome for each of these teams, but it's something that segues rather nicely, I feel like.
Here to start the third period. What team is this? It's not Team USA. Oh, yes, it is. They've got on new uniforms. They're wearing the logo of the Duck. I've never seen this before.
Dynamite segue.
Yeah, the Penguins jerseys are fantastic. We like them.
Yep.
They look great. They dumped the Vegas gold. Beautiful. The other 3 teams are bad.
Yep.
And not even like okay. No, bad.
They're awful.
Like bottom. Maybe bottom 5 might be a bit much. Bottom 10 for sure.
If we did a power rankings of the 30 NHL teams, these would be probably in the last 5.
Maybe the Senators escape the bottom 5, maybe.
But
it'd be close,
much.
And the Ducks and the Preds are absolutely 100% in there. So it's really not a great aesthetic Stanley Cup final. I said I wasn't even bringing that up.
It's
not where I was going with that.
After, so I could only assume.
No, I wasn't thinking of everyone's favorite website. No, but it just So when we talked about this ranking, we thought about ranking the second round jerseys, and there was 8 of them, so that makes it easy, or would have made it easy. But ranking the 4, I mean, it's kind of like Pittsburgh and then 3 piles of steaming garbage.
Yeah, if you really had to make me rank, it would be Pittsburgh 1, Ottawa 2, and there's a huge difference between 1 and 2.
Yeah.
What is it? Anaheim 3, Nashville 4. And the only reason why is because Nashville and their mustard yellow home uniforms is what seals their fate.
Yeah, it's really a toss-up for me in the last 2. I just hate that Ducks logo so much. So much. I don't know, but I guess, and also something that I found out, I was looking through, they were talking about the Adidas jersey release. The Ducks are going to orange next year.
I did not know that.
Yeah, the Ducks are going to orange next year. Allegedly. I don't know if that's been confirmed or not. The Oilers confirmed it, but the Ducks apparently are doing the same thing and have not confirmed it.
Apparently there's a run on orange.
Yeah, that's the color of the late teens, I guess you could say. But they're not wearing orange in the playoffs, which, granted, that jersey is not particularly great looking, but at the very least, it's got a much better logo.
Right.
And I don't know, and so we still don't know what Nashville is going to do with their jerseys. We talked about this at length. We want them to go back to blue, the yellow, or maybe I've given a little bit of thought to this. Maybe the yellow wouldn't be as bad if it weren't for all the crap they put on it.
Yeah,
I mean, there's just a lot of piping and
it's the poster for Reebok Edge.
It is. It's the ultimate Reebok Edge jersey, and so maybe if they go with a little bit of a simpler yellow jersey, I can stomach that, considering they're kind of all in on this whole Twinkie thing. And then Ottawa, I guess, is actually going to do a redesign. They're similar to the Wild. They've basically come out and said they're going to have a rebranding, redesign. I don't know what all that entails. I don't know if that's going to be a different logo. You got to think the colors probably remain the same, but it'll be interesting to see what they come up with, because their jersey set right now is just very, very uninspiring, to say the least. So, not a very pleasing jersey finale for us jersey files.
No, not at all.
But what do you do?
Well, that I don't know if you got any final thoughts, because that can probably wrap it up for us. I got nothing.
I don't either. Well, we didn't say Happy Mother's Day to all the moms.
That probably would have been a good one to lead in with.
Yeah, well, you can edit that in later. Or don't. So, yeah, that's obviously, where we both just came from, actually, is our respective Mother Day celebrations. So, Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers, to the 3 mothers that listen to this podcast, I think. But other than that, yeah, I don't know. I just, we're starting to get into summer now. Like, it's starting, the whole summer thing is starting to hit.
Yeah.
And it's starting to get into that time, where there's only one playoff game on a night, and it's absolutely gorgeous on the weekends like it was in the fine state of Minnesota this weekend. So
it was starting to sink in on the way here that, we have just, handful of shows left before we break for the summer.
Yeah, we've got a handful.
Probably
6
like
or so.
8.
Yeah, 6 or 8. I was just thinking about the article countdown I have until the draft and free agency, which is going to be a hot mess this year with Vegas, and then the draft that the Wild aren't in, and free agency, which they probably won't be participating much in either. So interesting though. But yeah, the offseason is it feels like it's basically upon us now, even though nothing is going to happen for another 2 to 3 weeks. Be interesting to see. Next week we have possibly some guests line up. That could be a lot of fun. That could fill a lot of time. We'll see if we want to do that one explicit or not. We might have to.
Otherwise, the censor button would really get a workout.
Otherwise, you're going to do a lot of editing.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes, but look forward to that. Otherwise, yeah, it's summer, folks. Like, whether we're not quite to that unofficial Labor Day or Memorial Day weekend time yet, but we're almost there. We're starting to drink on patios and such.
I know I am. Yeah. All right, that'll do it for us this week. We'll be back next week. You can find Ben and I on Twitter at Giles Farrell, at Ben Remington. You can find our podcast Twitter again at GATG Wild Podcast. Check out our work on zonecoverage.com. Find us on iTunes. Again, give us an iTunes rating. Libsyn, Stitcher. Or just the show page at zonecoverage.com. But, so thank you to everyone for following along with us again this week, and we will be back next week.
Later.
It's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.